Hi everyone, Stepan here. I'm going to show you the round 3 game from the Zagreb Cup played this May. And after 2 rounds, my team was in the lead. And in this round, we were playing Končar, who were the strongest team in the tournament, our main competitors, so to speak, and yeah, just the toughest pairing. And in between rounds 2 and 3, there was a break, and I actually went to France with Lucia so that she can settle there and everything. And then after the cup finished, I came back and stayed a couple of months, as you may know. So I'm playing Mr. Dugandzic, who is a very strong player. The last time we played, he was 22-20. I was 2 pawns up in a completely winning position and blundered mate. You can find that game on the channel. An extremely painful game, and I wanted my revenge. So this is one of the shortest and wildest games I've ever played. That's all I'm going to say. So he played pawn to d4. I played d5, c4, c6, the semi-Slav, e3, knight f6, and now if they play knight f3, you can get away with bishop f5. But if they play knight c3, bishop f5 is too risky, so e6 going into a normal semi-Slav, although white has the option to play the sort of stone wall with f4, but the pawn is on c4, so it's really not that good. So knight f3, and this is just a normal position now. Knight bd7, queen c2, the anti-Meran Semi-Slav. Usually people play bishop d3, which leads to Meran positions, and after bishop d3 there's this forced line, takes, b5, now the bishop can choose one of these 3 squares, and black plays for c5, and so on and so on. And the Meran positions are much more open, and they open up very quickly. White goes e4, black goes c5, and everything opens up. Although they often lead to equal positions because the pawn structure tends to be symmetrical with 2 open files, D and C. Queen c2 keeps a lot of tension in the position, and it makes it much harder for black to develop. Of course, you don't want to take on b5 now, or on c4, excuse me, because white will have basically gained tempo compared to the Meran lines, because in the Meran lines the bishop comes out to d3 and then takes on c4. So if we take on c4 now, it's a waste of tempo. So we don't. We develop the bishop to d6. White can now choose between different move orders. My opponent played b3. I castled. This is one of the main lines. And now white will usually play bishop e2, castle kingside. And black's job will be to play e5 very quickly to liberate this bishop. Black can also play with b6, bishop b7 and play for c5, but e5 is more common. One thing we should note is that when e5 is played, white will usually play cd to isolate the pawn and then take on e5. For example, bishop e2, e5, takes. Black plays with an isolated pawn, black has a weak b5 square, and so on and so on. There's a lot of theory, a lot of strategy behind the anti-Meran. My opponent played bishop b2, which isn't uncommon. It's a common move, the second most popular, but it signifies that white may not be castling kingside so quickly. And usually when people play bishop b2, the positions tend to be more complex, and black gets in e5 before white has managed to castle, which could be risky. Okay, so of course I played e5, that's the main move. And I know many different ideas here, but I was really not familiar with what my opponent did. So the main move here is bishop e2, and this was the focus of my study when I was preparing this. And e4, knight d2, and now black goes for this plan of knight b8, knight a6, knight c7 to support d5 to open up the bishop, and these 2 bishops look really strong. Okay, the other thing white could do is, as I mentioned, cd, d, knight e, and then bishop e2, and then develop, and this is the position we saw previously. Alternatively, instead of de, they could also play knight b5 straight away. But since the king is still in the center, bishop b4. Now, I'm going to show you what my opponent did, and it was extremely surprising. Before I do, I would like to thank Chessbook for sponsoring the video. They can help you learn your openings in an easy way. Chessbook is the best way to study your openings by far. It's extremely simple to use, it's intuitive, and it's very, very useful. I've been using it for all my tournament games since I started using it in the first place, and it actually helped me prepare for my opponents. For 2 games at the tournament I played in France, Chessbook was actually vital for my success because I drilled those variations until I knew them by heart. So what you can do with Chessbook is import your repertoires either by hand or by using a PGN file and then practice those moves. It's going to highlight opening mistakes in your games if you connect your Lichess or chess.com accounts. It's going to give you insights by opening, so you can see that I'm doing slightly worse with the Caro-Kann or with black than with white. You can get model games in your openings and many other features. And recently, Chessbook has added pre-made repertoires. And if you start adding your repertoire into Chessbook, then you can see pre-made repertoires, and one of them is mine. So I made the London system repertoire. You can get on Chessbook partially for free. If you'd like the full repertoire, you'll have to go premium, but it's extremely affordable. It's a couple of dollars per month, so it's worth it, I think. The repertoire should be simple. There are no explanations. It's not a course. It's just an opening repertoire, and I think it should be useful to start with. So you can just click on this repertoire. You can see my stuff here, add it to your repertoire and or browse through it and then learn it. I've also made 2 repertoires for black. So if you go to your black repertoire and let's say you go e4, e5, you can see my repertoire here. So I've made a complete e4, e5 repertoire covering everything from here. And yeah, you can import that and learn that. So if you don't feel like actually creating your own repertoires, I've made one on the London system with white, and I've made one on e4, e5, and one on d4, d5 based on the Queen's Gambit decline. So to start with, those should be good enough. If you would like to get those repertoires and make your opening study much, much easier, follow the link in the description, and I hope you find it useful. Thank you. Let's go back to the video. Okay, let's get back to the video. So my opponent took d5, which is fine. Okay, and after knight e5, which is the only move basically, my opponent castled queenside. And there are 27 games from this position. Black scores well. It should be about equal. But I was completely unprepared for this. I had no idea what was going on. It seemed risky. It actually reminds me of a Caro-Kann, where black plays c6 and then c5 and the bishop is on b7. This is normally what you get in the Caro-Kann in the Karpov variation, where in this case black can use the e4 square and so on. So I was confused, and I played queen e7, which is the best move. It just takes the queen away from the file. And believe it or not, 12 moves from here, the game is going to end, and there are going to be such crazy fluctuations in the evaluation that, I mean, this was just mental. Okay, so my opponent took cd, cd. And then in a way that makes sense, because the d pawn is now weak. It really cannot be taken straight away. It would be very risky to take the pawn immediately. If knight takes pawn, then knight takes, and after rook takes, we can now go knight f3, gf3, bishop e6, and there's a ton of initiative coming. The rook is coming to c8, and black isn't winning or anything. There's rook h5, you have to throw in g6, and so on and so on. But okay. So he didn't take the pawn straight away. First he played king b1, which is a prudent prophylactic move, makes a lot of sense. And now I went crazy. So I was thinking, okay, it seems interesting if he takes the pawn on d5, well, what if I could play bishop c6? So that seemed nice. So I played bishop d7, which is completely absurd, because the king isn't on c1 anymore. Bishop d7 just blunders a pawn. The simplest move is bishop e6, and that was of course my first candidate. And on knight d4 I just give up the bishop. I play knight c6, he takes on e6, and fine. Equal. The engine says black is slightly better, but it should be about equal. Alternatively, and this line I did not see, this is the best line, knight c6, and if knight takes, rook takes, then I simply win with knight b4. Again, it's not a winning position, but I win material. Instead, as I said, I played bishop d7, and bishop d7 goes from slightly better for black to completely busted. Completely busted. Knight takes, rook takes. And I was thinking, well, what if I play bishop f3? Unfortunately, there's rook e5. And just... there's rook e5. The knight's hanging. And that's just stupid. And when I was calculating this, when I was calculating bishop d7, I saw bishop c6, rook e5, and then, oh, I take on f3, that's great. But my queen's hanging. So this is just awful. So obviously I couldn't play bishop c6. So I played knight f3, which is arguably even worse. The best move is rook ac8, just keeping some initiative going. The idea behind bishop d7 was not only to play bishop c6, but to develop an initiative while these pieces were stuck. So I took on f3, which is awful. Opens up the g-file, makes it much easier for my opponent to play. I played bishop e6, and now if you want, you can pause the video, and this is white to play and win. White to play and win. Okay, so my opponent didn't find the best move, but what he did was good enough and gave him a huge advantage. This position is about +2 or +3 for white. The best move is bishop g7. The bishop cannot be taken, and I would have resigned. The very simple refutation to king takes bishop is rook g1 check, king h8, and the beautiful queen h7, after which rook h5 is coming and it's checkmate. My opponent played rook g1 first, which is also fine. And now, the way I played it, I was losing. If you play g6 here, you're okay. And g6, of course I saw the move, but this was my calculation. g6, queen c3, or rook h5 first, doesn't matter because the pawn is pinned. f6 is forced. And now rook h5, and what do? Apparently, you can play rook ac8, and on queen d3, you're perfectly fine. You go rook f7, and this should be a draw. Now, in the game, I played f6 first, and here's the difference. In the previous variation, after g6, the only way for white to make progress is to play queen c3. Queen c3 gets the queen away from this diagonal. As long as the queen stays on the light square diagonal, bishop d3 is absolutely deadly. So, my opponent played rook h5. I have to play g6. I don't see an alternative to g6. If I move the f-pawn, then rook g7. So g6, and now bishop d3. Now imagine the same position with the queen on c3. Bishop d3 doesn't do anything. Bishop d3 here, and I can resign. There are no moves. I have no moves. And I played bishop f7, trying to defend. Unfortunately, bishop f7 fails to rook takes h7. Now, please, if you want an exercise in defending very bad positions, try to hold against rook h7. An engine couldn't. It's losing, but there are some tricks you can try to set up. So try to recognize all the tactical features and defend. So first of all, when they play rook h7, you have to take. If, I don't know, rook c8, then bishop takes g6, and you cannot take the queen. If you take the queen, it's just mate. So rook takes queen, bishop takes mate. So you have to take. Once you take, they play bishop g6. Check. Now, if you take the bishop, losing is ensured. Why? Because the only thing white has to do is play e4 at some point, meaning that any covering with queen h7 to block the checks will not trade queens. So e4 is essential to block this diagonal. If queen h7 trade queens, then black is just a rook up. Okay, if it doesn't, then you'll see what happens. So if you take the bishop, which I didn't do, queen takes, king h8 only move, and now e4. Why e4? To make sure that queen h7 doesn't trade queens. Okay, e4 is the key move. If, for example, rook g4, then queen h7, and that's the end of the game. So e4, and now there is no defense. There is no defense. If, for example, rook c8, let me just show you a bad move. Queen h6 check, queen h7, and bishop takes f6. That's it. Rook takes, queen takes, mate. Okay, if bishop e5 to prevent that threat, okay, then simply bishop e5, fe5, queen h5, and again we're on the pawn. If queen h7, then queen e5 is checkmate. So you cannot take the bishop. So on bishop g6, I played king h8, and I figured, okay, I can survive this. I'm fine. I'm not fine. This is plus a million. The engine announces mate. My opponent played queen f5, and here was my calculation. Okay, the queen's on f5. He did not play e4. Now I can go queen h7. Unfortunately, I cannot go queen h7 if he plays it properly. So I took the bishop. Rook takes bishop, not queen, because you need the queen on h5. So rook takes bishop. And I played bishop e5, and I thought, okay, great. That's it. No more checks. Queen h5 isn't possible. Queen h5 just loses the game on the spot. Here's what my opponent should have done to win the game in a second. Same pattern as before, which I'd seen, but I hadn't calculated correctly for this variation. Very simple win. Bishop e5, fe5 is of course forced, and now you drag the queen to h7, take on e5, and it's checkmate. So queen h5, queen h7, queen e5 check, and that's it. Checkmate. My opponent had about 20 minutes on the clock when he played queen h5 check, and I almost had a heart attack. Almost. I don't know what almost having a heart attack feels like, but my heart was racing. I couldn't believe my luck. I played queen h7 in a second and waited for him to resign. The rook is pinned. And he actually very confidently played rook h6. Over the board, you can do that. You can play an illegal move. And I pointed out that the rook is pinned, and he immediately resigned. Of course, he's down a rook. He's going to lose the other rook as well. He's going to be 2 rooks down. It's absolutely hopeless. If you trade queens, you're down a rook. If you prevent a queen trade, then I just do this. And okay, fine. You can play queen f5, I guess. You can play queen f5 and then pin the rook. But you still, after rook f8, you have to trade queens, because the queen's pinned to the king. And my teammates couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. It seemed like it was an absolutely hopeless game, but I managed to win. Crazy. Unfortunately for us, we drew the match because on board 4, my teammate Juraj, we were all looking at the game, and we were all calculating a single variation in which his opponent is winning. But then we found a way for him to get out. He didn't see it. He lost the game. We drew the match. Still, after 3 rounds, we were still in the lead. Okay, I'm going to show you the next game in a few days. Or maybe even tomorrow. I hope you like this. This was an undeserved win. However, since I was winning the last time we played, and my opponent was winning this time, then it's sort of even. I got my revenge with an undeserved win. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye-bye.